Kotlin and many other languages, we have another different type of class called enum. The enum is short for enumerated type. So an enumerated type is another word for enumerate. So to enumerate means to list things one by one. So in this case here, let's go ahead and create that type class like that, and then we can give it a name. In this case, I'm going to use result as the name, and we'll see later why we're using result, because we are going to expand this example into other types of classes. Okay, but let's start small. So we have there, and then we open curly braces, and here is where we add that list of types. And it is customary or best practices to write all the types inside of this enum class in all caps. So success, comma, separating the list, if you will, and then I'm going to use failure, error as such. Okay, so now we have our enum. How do we use this? The idea really behind it in this case is to kind of see if we can garnish some sort of state of a program. So we say result, let's say we're using an application that goes and download things from the internet remotely. So we want to get some sort of result. So if result that we're getting is success, right, in this enum, then we want to do something. If it's failure, we do something. If it's error, of course, we do something else. Okay, that's kind of the example. So in this case here, we have our class enum. In our main, we can use it by doing the following. Let's create a function. Actually, not in the main, let's say outside. I'm going to create a function. Get result as such. And this get result, we're going to have a type. I'm going to say result, and going to be result type. Okay, our result. Make sure we have our package there. Okay, so what do we want to do in this function? Well, we are going to return something. What we want to return in this case, we're going to return when, going to use the when expression, when result, right? As result changes, because result is going to be a type of enum class, depending on what type we have, success, failure, error, we want to show something. And you'll see that we have this squiggly red line. If you hover over, it's going to say something to the fact one expression must be executed and necessary. Success, failure, error branches. So we're going to go ahead and add the else branch first because that's needed. And then I'm going to click on when again, Alt, Option, Enter. We're going to say add remaining branches. This just helps us to get all of the branches that are needed. We can type them all out ourselves, but these IDE helps us. Of course, if you're using a different IDE or different code editor, or if you're using Kotlin Playground, you'll have to type all of these yourself. Okay, so there we go. Now we have all of the results. For now, I'm just going to remove the else. Okay, so there we have it. So we have a to do here. That means we have to actually add something. So for now, if success, I'm just going to say print ln, and I'm going to say success. Right? For failure, let's say print ln failure, a little bit harsh, but that's okay. And for error, I'm going to say print error. Okay, there we go. So we have all the cases that we need there. So on main, we can call, first we're going to say val, create a variable here. We're going to say input. Okay, I'm going to set that to result dot error, for instance, and then I'm going to feed that into our get result. So let's say get result and pass in our result, pass in our input like this. Let's go ahead and run. Okay, so obviously it's going to go ahead and say error, right? If I change this to a different input, let's say success, if we run, as you will see, or as you would expect, this will say success. Now, in an application, a more robust application, we would want to separate everything into different pieces, which means we can create a repository because we're imagining that we're getting data from somewhere remotely, right? So we're going to create a repository, which is going to be a class that, as the name implies, it will contain the actual data. This class I'm going to call repository. I want to make sure that this class doesn't create too many instances of itself, because the more instances we create of a class, meaning the more objects of that class we have in memory, and it can affect performance in the long run. So there is a way in Kotlin that we can make sure that a certain class is not allowed to create many instances of itself. To do that, we say object. If we say object and we type a name of the class we want, in this case, it's going to be repository, then this will tell the compiler that this is indeed a class repository that is kind of like a singleton, meaning we won't be able to create many instances of it. So there will only be one instance of repository. Makes sense, because the idea here is that we fetch the data from somewhere, as an example, and then we don't have to recreate this repository as when we want it. So here I'm going to create a property for this class, or a field. I'm going to use private to say that this val here, this property, cannot be accessed outside of this class. So I'm going to say val, I'm going to say load state. Our load state is going to be of type result. Okay? And in the beginning, I'm going to set it to result.failure. In fact, what I can do, I'm going to add another, go back to our enum here, I'm going to add another state here called idle, right? So nothing really is happening, it's just idle. Okay, so when we do that, of course, I'm going to say result idle, and then just put here print idle. Okay, and so that's what we're going to do. So in our repository, we create a load state variable, and then we pass the failure from our, and in this case, actually, we're going to pass the idle, as I said, right? The first state. Okay, and then we are going to add, because we're understanding we're trying to simulate something that goes and fetches data somewhere remotely. So here I'm going to create another private var now, because I want to change this. In fact, let's make this also var, because we want these to be able to be, we want these to be mutable. And I'm going to say data fetched like this. And this for now is just going to be a string, and I'm going to make it null to begin with. Now, this is going to be a problem because we must do something to make this nullable. We have to put the exclamation point as such. Okay, there we go. So we're making progress here. Next, I'm going to create a function. A few actually, but let's start with one more. I'm going to say start fetch. Okay. So what is that we want to happen when the fetch starts? Well, when we're starting to fetch something, we want to change the state. So I'm going to say load state, in this case, is going to be equal to load state, or actually result. Okay. And I'm add a new one here, another state called loading, which means in our enum, we have to create that state here, loading as such. Okay. So now I can say result loading like this, and as it's loading, the data variable, data fetched, at this point is just going to be data like this. All right, because we started fetching, it says loading, we change the state, and then we pass some data to our data fetched property. And we can do the same thing for other states. I'm going to say fun, right? When say finished fetch like this, and then I'm going to say load state, I'm going to attach it to result success. Once we know that result is success, what we can do here, we can say data fetched and just give it a null, because we know that we already got the data, right? So it's good, so we just go back to null. What happens if there's an error? It's fun error, and if that's the case, I'm just going to say load state and set that to result, either error or failure. Either one of those work. I'm going to use error. And what we can do again, I can just create another function here, just that will get current state. Okay, this function obviously will return our result type, and I'm just going to return load state. So the concept here is very simple. We have a repository that will take care, abstract out all of the process that we have of getting information. We're assuming this information will obviously coming from somewhere. Could be a database, could be an API somewhere we have no control over. So now we can use this repository instead of what we did earlier here. I'm going to get rid of all of this. Now, because we attached to this class repository object to say, okay, we just want one instance. Okay, we don't have to instantiate it. Notice that in main now, I can just directly say repository, that's that, and then access any functions that we created. So I'm going to start with start fetch, and then I'm going to say get result. Look at this. Result is waiting for a result. In this case, I'm going to say repository. Again, I'm going to get current state. Where is this coming from? Well, if you notice at the bottom here, I have this get current state, because as we go through the process here in all these functions, we are actually setting up that state, right? When we say start fetch, we set the load state, this field here, to result.loading. And we say data fetch is equal to data and so forth. So when we say get current state, it will get the current state because we are returning the load state which has been going through the process here inside in start fetch, finish fetch, and so forth. So that's why we can pass that to get result. We say the result needs a result type, which is an enum at this point, and we get the current state, and voila. All right. So I'm gonna continue repository again, and let's say we want say finish. There, I'm going to also call again get result, and pass result here is going to be repository that get current state, repository again, that error, result, the same thing, and then finally I can just say get state, and then finally I'm going to say get result and pass a result. Okay, so we can stop here. Let's go ahead and run this and see what's going to happen. So I'm going to run. So this should simulate the process of fetching data and go through all that. So we're able to pull together a very simple state machine, if you will, because we are controlling the state of a process, of a fictitious process that will allow us to go and fetch something from the internet, on API or somewhere, or a database. It doesn't matter. Right? So we start from a state idle and then success, error, but we are passing through this process, these states as they change. Build upon this concept. At this point, we're using enums. Next, we're going to look at the shortcomings of using enums for such a state management. So in the next lectures, we will start deciphering internally shortcomings of using enums, as we are doing here, to control this state, as you see here. It looks great now, but there are some pitfalls that we need to be aware of, and we're going to learn how to use other tools to fix that.